Hey guys! Tonight we step into the half-forgotten corridors of ancient Greece, the ones lined with crumbling columns, echoing with the whisper of sandals, and the occasional dramatic thunderclap from Zeus. The air smells like olive oil and old marble dust, and somewhere a lyre is being tuned slightly off-key. You're here to meet monsters, lots of them, scaled, fanged, feathered, furred, and all terribly inconvenienced by heroic tourists waving swords around. You'll see how most of them lost, and why maybe that wasn't always fair. You'll also realize, somewhere between the lion's roar and the Hydra's hiss, that you probably wouldn't survive this world for 5 minutes. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is right now. Drop it in the comments below. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You walk into the dusty halls of myth where marble statues look almost alive. Each one seems to watch you pass with the patience of a god who's already seen this century come and go twice. The floor beneath your feet is littered with papyrus scraps, doodles of creatures, some winged, some tentacled, some just aggressively misunderstood. Every monster is here, trapped in story, waiting for you to notice them again. The old scholars say myths were never meant to be scary. They were meant to explain things. Why storms happen, why the crops fail, why sometimes the sea just decides to eat a ship. Monsters were metaphors that accidentally got too interesting. Historians still argue whether the Greeks actually believed in them or if they were just really committed to storytelling. It's like when you swear your cat sees ghosts. You don't believe it, but you're not about to test it either. You trail your fingers across carved stone reliefs. Heracles wrestling a lion, Perseus holding a head, Theseus looking very confident for someone about to get lost in a maze. The rhythm of their names begins to sound like a lullaby. Hero meets monster, hero struggles, hero wins. Except sometimes the victory feels suspiciously messy. Maybe the monsters weren't villains at all, just nature's way of humbling humanity. You pause at a cracked amphora, showing the Nemean Lion mid-roar. Its painted mouth is open wide enough to swallow a mortal whole, and its eyes are flecked with gold leaf. It looks like it might leap off the pottery if you blink too long. The curator voice in your head whispers, "Don't tap the glass, it bites." The stories always start the same way. Someone, usually Heracles, though sometimes a side character who deserved better, gets assigned an impossible task. Go slay this, fetch that, clean a stable so disgusting that it counts as a felony against hygiene. These labors were basically divine punishments disguised as character-building exercises, the kind of thing corporate retreats would dream up if Olympus ran HR. You move past the amphora to a shadowed alcove. Inside sits a cracked shield, its surface etched with tiny battle scenes. There's the lion again, now dead. The Hydra next, its head sprouting like bad ideas. The stag, the boar, the birds, all in order. It's the original monster manual, only in clay instead of print. And you realize this is going to be a long night, because the Greeks didn't believe in short stories. A scholar's scroll lies open on a pedestal, its edges curled and flaking. The inked words speak softly in your imagination, each beast a reflection of man's own excess. That line hits harder than you expect, because really, weren't these monsters just versions of us? Too greedy, too proud, too unwilling to let go of anger? The Greeks never built villains that weren't human in disguise. Even Medusa, poor misunderstood thing, started out mortal before divine politics gave her a bad hair decade. You take another step and notice faint sounds, the shuffle of hooves, the scrape of claws. The myths are waking up one by one, somewhere far down the corridor. A lion growls deep and low. It's not threatening, just tired. You imagine it's been telling the same story for 3,000 years and could use a nap. Same, honestly. A single torch flickers on the wall, throwing light over frescoes of heroes posing dramatically beside their trophies. In one, Heracles flexes beside the lion's skin like he's auditioning for an ancient gym endorsement deal. In another, he's standing over the Hydra, his nephew ready with the world's most illegal flamethrower. Every victory immortalized, every monster frozen mid-defeat. But the quiet between these images feels heavier than glory. You start to think the monsters might remember things differently. Mainstream historians note that many of these tales originated from pre-Greek folklore, stories of local spirits and beasts that the Mycenaeans absorbed as their empire grew. A quirky tidbit for you: the Nemean lion may have been inspired by ancient cave lion fossils found in Greece, mistaken for evidence of mythic beasts. Imagine being a Bronze Age shepherd stumbling upon one of those and deciding, yep, definitely divine punishment for something. You lean closer to a cracked mosaic floor where the tiles form a great circle. In the center, the lion again, surrounded by all the others. It looks almost like a clock of creatures, each marking a different lesson. Pride, fear, greed, curiosity, and you standing there, the newest observer in a 3,000-year-old classroom. Somewhere in this museum of memory, you catch the faintest scent, iron and smoke, maybe a hint of sea salt. The air tastes old but alive. A voice you can't quite place hums from the shadows, telling you the sequence matters. Each monster appears in its turn, each defeat carving another notch in the hero's fate. And if you listen closely, you can almost hear them lining up. The lion stretches, the hydra stirs, the deer flicks its golden ear. You feel something gentle tug at your sleeve, perhaps the whisper of a myth itself. It's inviting you to walk further down the corridor, deeper into the pattern. You follow, your footsteps soft against the marble, the torchlight dimming behind you. Ahead, the first roar rises, not of rage, but of memory. You smile faintly. This is going to be a very boring Greek myth indeed. The kind so steady and rhythmic it could lull an insomniac titan to sleep. And with that, the Nemean Lion waits just around the bend, yawning wide enough to fit your dreams inside its jaws. You round the corner, and there it is, the first of the labors, the great impossible feline with a mane like molten bronze. The Nemean Lion lounges on a rocky outcrop, tail flicking lazily, as though it's been waiting for this retelling since time began. Its hide gleams in the half-light, tougher than forged iron, and its yellow eyes are the color of old honey left too long in the sun. You can almost hear it sigh. Here comes another hero with a sword that's not going to work. You creep closer, the ground crackling with dry leaves and regret. The lion doesn't roar yet. It just watches, patient, aware that in this version, you're the quiet observer, the one who gets to see the parts the poets left out. You notice its breath misting faintly in the cool air, slow, steady, as though even monsters have mastered meditation. The story goes that Heracles was sent here by King Eurystheus, a man who basically invented the concept of micromanaging your demigod employee. The labor was simple on paper. Kill the lion that's been terrorizing Nemea. But simple, in Greek myths, always hides a catch, like just pop to the store, hiding a 40-minute checkout line and an existential crisis in the produce aisle. Heracles arrived in the hills carrying his bow and sword, humming perhaps, thinking he'd wrap this up by lunch. But soon enough, every arrow he fired bounced off the lion's hide and clattered uselessly to the ground. Historians still argue whether the myth came first or if some particularly resilient species of wildcat just refused to cooperate with the local hunters. You can picture Heracles standing there, eyebrows raised, realizing the usual hero tactics won't work. This is the moment where most of us would file an incident report and go home. But Heracles, being both clever and somewhat allergic to giving up, decided to chase the creature into its cave, a den with 2 openings, perfect for a bit of strategic chaos. The lion, of course, wasn't thrilled about being cornered. Ancient poets say its roar was loud enough to rattle olive trees and make the local shepherds swear off outdoor employment forever. Heracles blocked one entrance with boulders, stepped inside, and wrestled the beast bare-handed. You can almost feel the echo of that struggle in the air, the scrape of claws against stone, the sound of labored breathing, the thud of muscle against muscle. Eventually, Heracles did what heroes always do in myths. He won barely, using equal parts strength and stubbornness. He strangled the lion and then faced a new problem. Its hide was invulnerable, remember? No blade could cut it. And here's the delicious bit of mythic irony. The only thing sharp enough to skin the lion was one of its own claws. It's like the universe saying, you break it, you buy it, with the same tool you broke it with. That's how Heracles ended up wearing the lion's pelt as armor. Picture it, a man draped in golden fur, the lion's head perched on his own, like a macabre hood. Fashion historians would later call it statement outerwear. The rest of Greece called it terrifying. A mainstream historical fact hides under the legend's fluff. Lions really did roam parts of Greece in the Bronze Age. They likely disappeared by 1000 BCE, but not before leaving a deep impression on local imagination. When the poets sang about the Nemean Lion, they might have been remembering the last days when real lions prowled the hills near Mycenae, an echo of wildness already fading. And then comes the fringe tidbit. Some ancient sources hinted that the lion wasn't born of ordinary beasts at all. They said it was the child of Typhon and Echidna, those nightmare parents who spawned half the Greek monster family tree. Which means, technically, the lion was Heracles' cousin, twice removed by divine scandal. Thanksgiving on Olympus must have been awkward. You pause, imagining the lion's perspective. It didn't ask to terrorize anyone. It was just living its giant cat life. Maybe it roared too loudly, scratched a temple column, scared some goats. Suddenly, everyone's labeling it a monster. It's the eternal mythic problem. Exist too magnificently, and someone will turn you into a cautionary tale. A faint wind rolls through the hills of memory, stirring the grass around your feet. The scent of sun-warmed fur and iron dust lingers. You feel that post-battle stillness, the one that always follows when a story reaches its predetermined end. But the lion's eyes, even in death, seem to flick open for a heartbeat. Maybe it's just the torchlight, or maybe the myth isn't finished with you yet. Heracles drags the carcass back to Eurystheus, who reportedly hides inside a jar When he sees it, that's not an exaggeration. The king literally climbed into a giant jar out of fear. You can't help but admire the commitment to cowardice. It's like ancient Greece's version of logging off for mental health reasons. Eurystheus then decrees that Heracles may never again bring proof of his conquests inside the palace. Bureaucracy, even in myth, always finds a way to make the hero's job harder. Heracles shrugs, adjusts his new lion-skin hoodie, and trudges off toward the next task on his cursed to-do list. But for you, the scene lingers. The lion's den remains quiet now, except for the drip of water from stalactites and the faint scuff of ghostly paws pacing in circles. You wonder if the lion spirit still prowls there, watching for the next hero, or the next listener foolish enough to wander too close. There's an unspoken rhythm forming in your mind already. Problem, monster, misunderstanding, exhaustion. It's soothing, in a way, the predictability of ancient chaos. Maybe that's why these tales still help people drift off. Every monster loses in the end. Every roar fades into mythic silence. It's the bedtime pattern of the cosmos, conflict followed by calm. You glance back once before moving on. The cave mouth is darker now, the shadows thick as velvet. Somewhere deep inside, the lion exhales one last warm breath of story, and the air still hums faintly with its strength. You step away slowly, your sandals whispering against the ancient path, toward the marshes where another, wetter nightmare waits. And behind you, the faintest sound, almost a purr, reminds you that in some versions of the tale, the lion's hide never lost its warmth. The armor Heracles wore might have still breathed softly, a living reminder that victory often carries the heartbeat of what you've defeated. You pull your cloak tighter. The hills of Nemea sink into the horizon behind you, golden and sleepy. The next shadow ahead ripples over water, and you already know, if one lion couldn't stop a hero, maybe a few extra heads will do the trick. You step out of the golden hills of Nemea and into the scent of stagnant water. The world changes here, greener, heavier, the kind of air that clings to your skin and refuses to let go. Marshland stretches ahead, veiled in fog that glows faintly, like it remembers old fire. Somewhere beneath that mist, the ground squelches with the slow patience of something alive. This is Lerna, where the Hydra dreams. You've heard of it before? Everyone has. The monster so inconvenient that even cutting off its head was considered bad form. You pause at the marsh's edge and watch faint ripples move across the water, slow and deliberate. Each one could be wind or not. Heracles came here next, wearing his new lion-skin cloak like a declaration of overtime hours. His task, slay the Ceryneian Hydra, a serpent with many heads, and a personality disorder involving immortality. It lived in this swamp near the entrance to the Underworld, which feels like an obvious zoning violation. Historians still argue whether the Hydra was a symbol of the marsh's toxic gases, or an allegory for political corruption, because apparently, if you cut one head of bureaucracy, two more grow back. You take a cautious step forward. The reeds whisper. The air tastes faintly of sulfur and pondweed, and the smell alone could knock out a demigod. Somewhere underfoot, something bubbles. The Hydra's body rises slow as dawn, a sinuous tangle of necks and glittering eyes, each head moving independently, yet somehow coordinated, like the worst synchronized swimming team in mythology. The creature hisses, and every sound overlaps into a dreadful harmony. One head leans close, tongue flicking, as though checking whether you've brought snacks. You remember the details. Heracles didn't come alone this time. He brought his nephew Iolaus, who, depending on the storyteller, was either a brave sidekick or a very concerned intern. The plan was simple: cut off a head, burn the stump, prevent regrowth. Easy to say when you're not standing knee-deep in ancient swamp muck with 8 pairs of glowing eyes judging your sword technique. The first swing came quick. A head flew off, and instantly 2 more sprouted in its place, snapping like whips. You can almost hear Heracles mutter, "Great, now it's buy one get one." The battle must have looked absurdly repetitive. Chop, hiss, burn, curse, repeat. Iolaus darted in with a torch each time, cauterizing the necks before the Hydra could multiply again. It was the ancient Greek equivalent of playing a very stressful game of whack-a-mole. At last, when the air was thick with smoke and the marsh glowed faintly red, the Hydra began to falter. Heracles struck the final blow to its central head, the one said to be immortal. He buried it under a heavy rock, because that's how you solved supernatural problems before Google. Mainstream history tells us the Hydra might have originated as a poetic exaggeration of real danger. The marsh gases around Lerna were famously noxious. People who wandered too close often fainted or died, their bodies found days later half submerged in algae. A many-headed monster, some might have said, that breathes poison. And just like that, myth was born. A quirkier tidbit: some local traditions claim that the Hydra's venom, once spilled, seeped into the nearby springs, so much that even today a few Greek villages avoid drinking from certain ancient wells, just in case. Whether out of respect or superstition, no one builds there. It's like the myth left a "Do Not Disturb" sign across the entire region. You look around the murky marsh. Frogs chirp like nervous spectators and reeds sway as though whispering old gossip. There's something strangely peaceful about it now, long after the struggle. You realize Heracles' greatest challenge wasn't the monster. It was persistence. The endless repetition, the frustration of effort multiplied against you. Maybe that's why this story endures. It's the ultimate metaphor for trying to get your inbox to 0. As you watch, a glint catches your eye, a small vial half buried in the mud. You reach down and brush it off. In the myth, Heracles dipped his arrows in the Hydra's blood afterward, turning them lethally poisonous. It was a smart move at the time, though it backfired years later when that same poison ended up on his own skin. Poetic justice, or bad product recall. You decide. The Hydra itself wasn't evil, really. It was a creature doing what creatures do, protecting its lair, defending its patch of swampy real estate. But the myths needed monsters, and humans needed metaphors for the problems they couldn't solve. So the Hydra became a lesson about persistence, teamwork, and the value of carrying a nephew with a torch. You wade a little farther out just to see where it might have slept. The ground bubbles faintly, and every few seconds the water stirs in circular ripples. Maybe that's just gas escaping from deep below. Or maybe one head still moves under the mud, sluggish and dreaming. The ancients said you could never truly kill the Hydra, that its spirit remained in the soil, whispering whenever people got too proud of progress. It's easy to imagine it now. You stand in the mist, breathing slow, and the swamp hums softly around you. The reeds rustle like pages turning. If you close your eyes, you can almost feel the Hydra's breath, not angry, just rhythmic. It feels like the marsh itself, inhaling and exhaling, steady, patient, unbothered by the passing of heroes. Heracles left this place victorious but uneasy. The Hydra was gone, yes, but so was something else, a piece of mystery. The marsh fell quiet, its silence deeper than before. Even the frogs seemed to mourn. And though centuries have passed, you can't shake the thought that the Hydra didn't really lose. It just changed form. It became the quiet persistence of life, creeping back through mud, the endless growth of reeds, the return of mist at dawn. Historians still argue whether the Hydra's story hints at early Greek environmental warnings, the danger of draining wetlands or burning nature to control it. Maybe. They say Heracles' victory was also a caution. Every cut we make grows back. Every problem we bury seeps into something else. The myth feels strangely modern that way. You take one last look at the water. The reflection shivers, splitting your face into many overlapping copies. For a second, you almost look like the creature itself. Many heads, many thoughts, none quite in sync. The Hydra smiles back faintly before fading into ripples. Behind you, the air grows lighter, the marsh recedes into mist, the bubbling quiets, and your path curves upward toward the forests of Artemis. Somewhere in those trees, a deer with golden antlers waits, too graceful, too smug, and entirely uninterested in being caught. You step out of the swamp and onto solid ground again, the lion's roar and the Hydra's hiss now fading into memory. Each labor slips behind you like a sigh. You can feel the rhythm building, one challenge after another, each stranger, each softer at the edges. It's starting to feel like the pulse of a dream, the kind that pulls you deeper with every step. You leave the swamp behind, brushing a faint slick of mist from your sleeves. The path rises now out of the muck, into the cool shadow of a forest so dense it feels like the inside of a cathedral. Sunlight filters down through leaves that shimmer gold at the edges, dappling the moss underfoot. Somewhere ahead you hear the faint, musical clatter of hooves, light, quick, and unhurried. The Ceryneian Hind is already running, of course. It's what she does. She isn't a monster in the teeth and claws sense. No snarling, no scales, no roaring challenge. Just grace and speed and a golden shimmer like dawn made tangible. Heracles' third labor wasn't to kill her, but to catch her, which you soon realize is infinitely worse. Killing is quick, chasing takes patience. The hind belonged to Artemis, goddess of the hunt, which already makes this a terrible idea. The deer was sacred, untouchable, divine. Heracles had been told to capture it alive and bring it back, but no one explained how you politely tell a goddess you're borrowing her favorite pet. Historians still argue whether this labor was meant as punishment or as a test of humility. Either way, Heracles was about to become the ancient world's most exhausted jogger. You tread softly through the forest, listening. The hind moves like light itself, never quite where you expect. One moment, a glint of antler through the trees. The next, gone as though it dissolved into sunlight. Even the birds seem to hush when it passes. Somewhere deep in the woods, you hear Heracles' footsteps too, steady, determined, very much out of breath. He chased that deer for a year. A year! Imagine an entire calendar turning over while you're still muttering, just one more try. At one point, the chase led him north across rivers and through snowbound mountains. The hind never tired, because divine creatures rarely do. Heracles, however, was mortal enough to ache. Still, he pressed on. Maybe stubbornness counts as a superpower. Eventually, he cornered the hind near the river Ladon. It tried to leap across, and Heracles, in a moment of desperate improvisation, loosed an arrow, not to kill, but to slow it. The shaft struck between bone and sinew just enough to wound without ending it. He cradled the creature gently, whispering apologies to both the deer and whatever celestial HR complaint Artemis was about to file. When the goddess did appear, it was not with thunder or fire, but with that particular terrible calm that means you've just crossed a divine line. She demanded to know why her sacred hind was bleeding in a mortal's arms. Heracles explained his impossible situation, how he'd been ordered, cursed, forced. Artemis listened, lips tight. Finally she relented, letting him take the deer so long as he promised to return it unharmed, which he did, albeit probably limping from divine side-eye. The forest around you hums with memory. The hind steps delicately from behind a cedar, eyes luminous. You freeze. It's not afraid, just curious, as if weighing your worthiness. Sunlight slides along its golden antlers, scattering halos across the bark. Its breath steams faintly in the cool air. You realize how small everything feels beside it. The noise of cities, the weight of history, even Heracles himself. Mainstream historians say the myth might reflect old rituals of Artemis worship, where deer were symbolic messengers between humans and gods. Some scholars think the capture represented taming wild nature long enough to understand it, not own it. A lovely theory if you ignore that Heracles basically shot first and negotiated later. A quirky tidbit for your collection. Some rural Greeks believed for centuries that certain deer were protected by the goddess herself. Hunters who shot one would find their arrows vanish mid-flight or return to pierce their own quiver. Farmers told stories of seeing glowing antlers in the moonlight, proof that the divine hind still wandered, unseen but not gone. Even today, a few shepherds swear they've seen its silhouette against the hills near Ladon, especially on cold mornings when the mist looks like silk. You take another step forward. The hind flicks an ear, then darts away, so fast you barely see the motion. Just a blur of light, a flutter of dust. You're left standing among the ferns, heart stilling into the rhythm of the forest. The silence that follows is thick, but not empty. It hums with something like contentment. You can't help but think this story feels different from the others. There's no gore, no triumphal posing with trophies. Just pursuit, patience, and the quiet relief of letting go. Heracles didn't slay this creature. He learned from it that not every challenge needs to end in conquest, that some victories are gentler. Historians still argue whether this labor marked a turning point in the hero's psyche, his first glimpse of humility, or just a rare day off from carnage. Either way, the hind endures, running endlessly through time. A shaft of sunlight falls across your path, and for a heartbeat you see movement, a glint of gold between trees. Maybe it's the hind again, or maybe just light playing tricks. You follow anyway, because curiosity is contagious in these stories. The forest opens into a glade where frost still clings to the grass, and in the distance, snow-capped peaks shimmer. Somewhere up there waits another test, a wild boar the size of a small cottage, busy minding its own business and absolutely not ready for visitors. You glance back once. The forest seems to breathe, the leaves rustling softly, like applause. The hind's tracks already fade behind you, erased by the breeze. You imagine Heracles at the end of that year-long chase, panting but smiling, realizing he's spent a year trying to catch something uncatchable, and somehow feels calmer for it. The ground under your feet hardens as you climb. The air grows thinner, colder. Each breath leaves a small ghost behind. You look up, and the mountain looms, a jagged tooth biting into the sky. Somewhere near its snowline, the next labor waits. Tusks, temper, and a roar that can split pine trees. You pull your cloak tighter, still feeling the echo of golden hooves in your chest, and smile faintly. It's hard not to like a myth where the monster refuses to be monstrous. The hind, in its way, might be the smartest of them all. It let the hero tire himself out, then forgave him for being human. That's a lesson worth sleeping on. The wind picks up. The forest fades into silver mist, and the scent of pine replaces the sweetness of cedar. Ahead, the faint grunt of something enormous rolls down the slope. You sigh. So much for peace and quiet. You climb higher into the chill air, where your breath hangs like little ghosts that vanish as quickly as they appear. The forest below dissolves into a smear of green, and ahead snow begins to crust the ground. This is the domain of the Erymanthian Boar, a creature so temperamental it makes the Nemean Lion look like a therapy cat. Somewhere up here in the icy folds of Mount Erymanthus, a snorting, tusked force of nature is busy rearranging the local ecosystem. You can almost hear it before you see it, that deep, rhythmic grunt, the kind of sound that says, "I don't do visitors." The wind carries it down the slope, mixed with the crackle of frost and the occasional startled squawk of a bird abandoning its post. You adjust your cloak and try to convince yourself you're just here for the view, not the giant murder pig. Heracles, of course, had no such luxury. Eurystheus, the king with a passion for unmanageable assignments, sent him to capture the boar alive. Not kill, not scare off, but capture. Imagine being told to deliver a rampaging creature the size of a minivan, fully conscious, without losing your deposit on the countryside. Historians still argue whether Eurystheus was testing Heracles' strength or just seeing how far he could push the concept of busy work as punishment. The boar itself was legendary, massive, shaggy, and faster than anything its size had a right to be. It roamed the snowy slopes, trampling crops and scattering villagers, its tusks sharp enough to carve through trees. Some said it could uproot entire pine trunks just to scratch its back. A few bold hunters had tried to face it before. The boar, unimpressed, had promptly rearranged their travel plans into the afterlife. You picture Heracles trudging up this same slope, snow squeaking underfoot, breath fogging the air. He's probably muttering to himself about career choices. The lion's skin keeps him warm, but not patient. Somewhere in his mind he must be thinking, "I've already fought a Hydra. Surely a pig can't be worse." Oh, Heracles. Famous last thoughts. Eventually he finds the beast, rooting through snow, steam rising from its nostrils like smoke from a forge. The boar turns, eyes gleaming, muscles rippling beneath thick bristles. It snorts once, and the sound hits like a drumbeat in your chest. Heracles lowers his spear, but the ground is slick, the air biting. This isn't going to be about strength alone. It's about timing. According to the poets, Heracles chased the boar through the snow until both were exhausted. He herded it toward a deep patch where the snowdrifts lay thick and treacherous. The boar plunged forward and got stuck, thrashing and bellowing. Heracles lunged, grabbed it by the hind legs, and wrestled it into submission. Try not to imagine that too vividly. It's mostly grunting, snow, and mutual disbelief. When he finally hauled the creature back to civilization, it was still alive, still furious, and very much not enjoying the trip. Eurystheus, ever the coward, saw Heracles approaching with the boar slung over his shoulder and immediately dove into his favorite hiding jar again. There's something oddly comforting about that image, the world's mightiest hero showing up at work with a snorting trophy, and management responding by self-crating. Mainstream historians think the Erymanthian Boar may have originated as a tale about winter itself, the season that trampled fields, destroyed food stores, and left people scrambling to survive. Taming the boar might have symbolized enduring the harsh cold or learning to live in balance with it. Others, ever practical, suggest there were once enormous wild boars in the region, and one especially ill-tempered specimen inspired the myth. The ancient Greeks had a habit of turning inconvenient wildlife into metaphors. And then there's the quirky tidbit. Some versions of the story claim the boar wasn't entirely animal. A few local legends describe it as a cursed guardian of the mountain, transformed by Artemis to punish hunters who ignored her sacred woods, which, if true, means Heracles basically kidnapped an immortal park ranger. That's one way to get fined by the gods. You glance around the mountain slope. The air hums with the echoes of that long chase, hoofprints frozen in myth, breaths that still hang in the cold. Snow crunches beneath your feet, and for a moment you think you hear something moving behind you. You turn, just the whisper of the wind sliding between trees. Still, your heart beats a little faster. These stories have a way of making you feel watched. You imagine the boar now, freed from its mythic burden, roaming somewhere deep in time's forest, no longer monstrous, just part of the landscape, snuffling through roots, occasionally remembered by frightened shepherds. Maybe that's how all monsters fade, not slain, not erased, but absorbed back into the world that birthed them. Heracles continued his journey, of course. Before leaving the mountain, he stopped by the home of a centaur friend named Pholus, a detail the storytellers usually slip in to remind us that even heroes need coffee breaks. There, a misunderstanding about sacred wine led to a fight, some accidental chaos, and the death of several centaurs. It's one of those footnotes that reveals how myths, like humans, are rarely tidy. Historians still argue whether this episode was added later, a way to link Heracles' labors with older mountain cults devoted to the wild spirits of nature. But for now, you linger on the summit. The snow reflects the late afternoon light, pink and blue like polished marble. The wind whistles through the pines, soft and low. You can almost see Heracles in the distance, trudging away with the boar slung across his shoulders, each step marking a rhythm between struggle and victory. You half expect him to look back and wink, some silent acknowledgement that all this absurdity is part of the plan. The slope begins to soften beneath your feet as you descend. The air warms. The snow gives way to brown earth and rustling reeds. Somewhere below, water glints, the shimmer of a lake or maybe a marsh. You hear the faint beating of wings, metallic, rhythmic, unnerving. The Stymphalian birds are gathering, polishing their bronze feathers in the sun like tiny homicidal ornaments. You smile wearily, from lions to hydras, to deer to boars, each one wilder, each one oddly familiar. You start to see the pattern forming, the way these creatures connect through their defiance, their refusal to be easy. And as the wind rushes past your ears, it almost sounds like applause again, the kind that echoes across centuries. Somewhere up ahead, the next story sharpens its beak. You pull your cloak tight, feeling the mountain's chill fade into anticipation. The air hums, and the world tilts slightly toward myth again. You reach the foothills by dusk, where the air smells faintly of iron and wet reeds. A shallow lake sprawls before you, its surface broken by tall grasses and the occasional ripple that looks too deliberate to be wind. The place feels uneasy, too quiet except for a faint metallic clicking, like coins brushing together in the dark. You realize it's not the sound of money, but of feathers, sharp, bronze feathers. These are the Stymphalian Birds, the next stop on Heracles' ever-expanding to-do list. They live here, in this half-rotten marsh, nesting in trees so blackened by droppings that even moss refuses to grow. The myths call them man-eaters, though some versions politely downgrade that to occasionally inconvenient. Either way, they're not the sort of birds you feed breadcrumbs to. You stand at the edge of the lake and squint. At first, the surface looks still, but then you notice faint glints of light flickering just under the branches. Eyes, hundreds of them. The reeds rustle, and one bird shifts, sending a rain of bronze feathers tinkling to the mud below. They shimmer like daggers in the dying light. When Heracles came here, he was already halfway through his labors and, frankly, out of patience. King Eurystheus had told him to deal with the birds that infested the region. No one mentioned how absurdly dangerous they were. Each feather could slice through flesh. Each beak could pierce armor. They were, in short, flying cutlery. Heracles stood where you stand now, wondering how to fight something that can both swarm and stab. Arrows, useless, they'd just dodge. Traps, laughable. Fire, probably just create crispy airborne shrapnel. This is when Athena, because every myth needs one divine consultant, showed up with a gift, a pair of bronze crotala, or clappers, forged by Hephaestus himself. Essentially, they were ancient noisemakers designed to scare the birds skyward. Historians still argue whether the crotala were real instruments or poetic metaphors for thunder or ritual percussion. Either way, it worked. You imagine Heracles standing there, shaking those clappers like a very determined percussionist at a heavy metal concert. The sound that followed must have been unbearable, a metallic clatter echoing off the water, bouncing through the reeds. The birds, startled, burst from the trees in a dark cloud. Their wings beat the air into chaos. The sun flashed off their feathers like shards of a broken mirror. Heracles loosed his arrows then, each one tipped in Hydra venom. The sky filled with motion, light, and noise. Some birds fell, others scattered toward distant lands, supposedly becoming the ancestors of the man-eating birds later found by Jason and the Argonauts. Because apparently, when Heracles solved a problem, he just relocated it. You crouch by the lake and pick up one of those bronze feathers. It's heavy, cold, and dull-edged now. Time has stolen its bite. Still, you feel a faint hum beneath your fingers, as if a remnant of the creature's song remains trapped inside. The myth says their cry could pierce the soul. Poets described it as a shriek that made even the gods cover their ears. Mainstream historians tend to read this story symbolically. The Stymphalian birds represented disease, famine, or the destructive flocks that plagued real Greek farmers. Clearing them was both literal and spiritual. Heracles restoring balance between people and the natural world. A quirky tidbit, though. Ancient travelers once claimed that bronze-colored birds actually nested near Lake Stymphalius. Their metallic hue came from the minerals in the water, and they were said to dive-bomb anyone who disturbed their eggs. Science meets superstition. Myth ensues. You look across the marsh. The water glows faintly now under the rising moon, each ripple catching starlight. You can almost see the shapes of the birds above it, translucent silhouettes circling in slow arcs, wings whispering against the air. They're not menacing anymore, just watchful, as if they've learned that time has tamed their legend. Heracles, having finished his noisy extermination, supposedly cleaned his weapons and trudged off, muttering about how he was becoming the world's first pest control professional. But there's something oddly poetic about this labor. He didn't just kill monsters, he cleared the skies. He made space for silence again. You tilt your head back, watching the last of the spectral flock fade into the stars. The quiet that follows is immense. Even the reeds seem to hold their breath. You wonder if the bird's metallic cry once echoed far enough to wake the nearby towns, if the people of Stymphalian dreamed of storms because of it. Or maybe, late at night, when the wind rushes over the water just right, they still hear that clatter. Historians still argue whether these tales were warnings about environmental imbalance. Perhaps the message was that when nature turns against you, it's because you've ignored its rhythms too long. The Greeks understood that even a marsh could rebel if mistreated, and maybe the birds, with their armored feathers and violent flight, were just the swamp's way of saying, "Enough." You toss the feather back into the mud and watch it sink slowly, leaving a tiny ripple that spreads outward and vanishes. The lake seems calmer now, satisfied that its story has been retold. Behind you, the path winds onward, away from water and into the scent of salt and wild flowers. Somewhere beyond those hills lies Crete, the island of kings, labyrinths, and one very famous bull with an attitude problem. You can almost hear the ocean calling, waves breaking against the cliffs like applause for a hero's next mistake. You take one last look over your shoulder. The marsh glimmers faintly under the moon. In the distance, you swear you see a flicker of wings, a brief flash of bronze. Maybe it's just the light. Or maybe the birds are still out there, quieter now, gliding through centuries unseen. After all, some monsters never really die. They just change altitude. The wind picks up, rustling through your hair, carrying the smell of the sea. The air feels cleaner now, sharper. You breathe in deeply, and the faintest metallic tang lingers on your tongue, like the aftertaste of myth itself. And then, with your steps soft against the path, you follow the scent of salt toward the horizon, where moonlight turns the water silver, and a bull waits, pawing the sand, horns catching the glow like twin crescents. By morning, the reeds and the metallic whispers of the marsh are far behind you. You follow the coastline now, where the air smells of salt and sun-baked limestone. Gulls wheel overhead, their cries mingling with the slow percussion of waves against rock. Ahead, Crete rises from the sea like a sleeping giant. White cliffs, terraced olive groves, and the faint glimmer of palace roofs. Somewhere, amid all that stone and sunlight, waits a bull that refuses to behave, a creature equal parts divinity and scandal. The Cretan bull, they call it. Another of Heracles' tasks, another logistical nightmare disguised as a moral lesson. You can almost imagine King Eurystheus rubbing his temples as he dictated this one. Go to Crete and bring back the bull that's been wrecking the place. Simple words, absurd implications. You reach the port city of Knossos in your mind's eye, the labyrinthine heart of the island. Fishermen shout, nets glisten, and the marketplace hums with rumor. The locals talk of the bull with equal parts fear and awe. It came from the sea, they say. sent by Poseidon himself as a gift to King Minos, a magnificent animal, white as foam, with horns that shimmer like polished ivory. It was meant for sacrifice, a token of devotion to the god, but Minos, enamored by its beauty, decided to keep it. Here's where the myth tilts sharply toward soap opera. Poseidon, thoroughly unimpressed with mortal vanity, cursed the king in a way that makes every modern therapist sigh. He made Minos' wife, Pasiphae, fall hopelessly in love with the bull. The result of that divine prank was the birth of the Minotaur, a creature so famous it eventually needed its own real estate. Historians still argue whether this entire episode was a moral allegory about hubris or simply the ancient world's way of dramatizing bad leadership decisions. You can picture the bull now standing alone in the palace courtyard, snorting at the walls. It isn't evil, it's confused, a sacred creature trapped in mortal chaos. Over time it breaks free, rampages across the countryside, destroying fields, scattering farmers, trampling statues. Heracles' job is to catch it alive and bring it back, a trend we're starting to notice. No one ever lets him just end things cleanly. The island hums with heat as you wander inland. Cypress trees shimmer in the haze. You hear the bull before you see it, a thunderous bellow rolling across the hills. When it charges into view, it's a vision of raw power, muscles coiled under glossy white hide, hooves striking sparks from the stone. Heracles stands his ground, lion skin cloak flaring like a banner. The bull lowers its head, horns flashing, and the world contracts to the heartbeat between them. When they collide, the sound is somewhere between thunder and earthquake. Dust erupts, birds scatter. Heracles grapples the creature, muscles straining, feet sliding through sand and sweat. This isn't a battle so much as a contest of stubbornness. The bull snorts, bucks, and twists, but Heracles holds fast. Slowly, impossibly, he wrestles it down, pressing its head to the earth until its breath comes ragged and its hooves still. Mainstream historians believe this myth might symbolize the subjugation of natural chaos, Crete's way of expressing dominion over both the sea and the land. The bull, after all, was sacred to both Poseidon and the local Minoan religion. Bulls appear everywhere in Cretan art. Frescoes, carvings, even the ritual of bull leaping, where acrobats vaulted over charging animals in displays of divine harmony. Maybe the story of Heracles catching the bull simply rephrased that ritual in heroic terms. Then comes a quirkier note from later retellings. Some versions claim that after Heracles subdued the bull, he released it on the mainland, where it wandered north and eventually became the same bull that fathered the Minotaur, or, depending on who's gossiping, was later captured by Theseus. Mythology never wastes a good prop. It just recycles it. You can almost see the bull now, calmer under the hero's hand, eyes wide and shining. For a moment, the scene softens. Heracles strokes its flank, murmuring something low and respectful. There's no hatred here, only the weary understanding of two creatures trapped in stories too large for them. Historians still argue whether this labor was about humility or reconciliation, the hero learning not only to conquer nature, but to coexist with it. You like that version best, the image of a man and a bull breathing side by side, their anger cooling under the Cretan sun. Heracles eventually led the creature to the shore, built a makeshift raft, and somehow ferried it across the Aegean. You pause to imagine that voyage, the sea glittering, the bull shifting restlessly on the deck, Heracles muttering prayers to every god with jurisdiction over livestock and waves. A few sailors swore they saw the pair pass by, man and beast silhouetted against dawn, and claimed the bull's horns glowed like twin lanterns guiding them home. When they finally reached Tiryns, Eurystheus once again panicked at the sight of the live bull and dove into his jar. It's a running gag at this point, one you start to find soothing in its predictability. Some say the bull escaped afterward, vanishing into the wild, where it continued to wander until the myths ran out of map. You stand on Crete's cliff edge now, watching the surf crash below. The air is warm, salted, and heavy with the hum of cicadas. The bull's bellow fades into the wind, replaced by the far-off laughter of fishermen hauling in nets. Everything feels suspended, the island exhaling after centuries of storytelling. A fringe detail drifts back to you. Some ancient writers hinted that the bull's rampage left strange markings in the Cretan soil, spirals etched deep into the rock, visible only from above. Later, generations mistook them for labyrinth patterns, proof that myth and geography had blurred together. You like that idea, that stories leave geological fingerprints. The light begins to change, softening into gold. The island glows, and somewhere behind you, the palace of Knossos sighs under its own weight of legend. You know the next task waits on the mainland again, darker, stranger. Horses this time, flesh-eating ones, no less. You'd think someone on Olympus might have stepped in with a safety memo by now. You turn from the sea, one last glance at the horizon where the bull disappeared. The waves flash white against the rocks, echoing the shimmer of its hide. For a moment, it feels like the creature's still there, eternal, untamed, galloping just beneath the water's skin. The wind shifts, carrying the faint smell of hay and something sharper, blood or fear, it's hard to tell. Somewhere beyond the shore, in the stables of Thrace, restless hooves pound against the earth. You sigh, smile faintly, and keep walking. The stories never stop. They only change their disguises. The sea wind fades behind you as you cross into Thrace, a land of red soil, bitter wine, and the kind of kings who think hospitality involves iron chains. The air here tastes of dust and something faintly metallic. You follow the sound of hooves, too many, too close, each one pounding with the impatience of something that hasn't eaten in a while. And that's the problem. These horses don't graze, they feast. Diomedes' mares, 4 of them, depending on which ancient gossip you read. Beautiful, strong, and uncomfortably carnivorous. They belong to King Diomedes of Thrace, a man whose hobbies include tyranny, bad manners, and ignoring the fine print of divine morality. Heracles' next labor is to steal these horses and bring them back, alive if possible. Alive being a word that starts to sound flexible when you're dealing with flesh-eating livestock. You walk along the ridge overlooking their pasture. The landscape is oddly serene. Rolling hills, a slow river winding like a lazy snake. But the stillness feels wrong, too quiet. Even the birds stay high, circling but never landing. And then you see them, 4 horses standing by the water's edge, coats shining like burnished bronze, manes flickering with the faint shimmer of embers. Their eyes, dark, deep, and intelligent, lock on you all at once. It's not curiosity, it's assessment. Heracles must have felt that same prickle of realization when he arrived, that these weren't ordinary beasts. They shifted and breathed like something divine gone sideways. The myth says their names were Podargus, Lampon, Xanthus, and Dinas, translated roughly swift, shining, golden, and terrible, which is Greek for run now. He approached carefully, hiding behind rocks, probably muttering that this was the worst internship in heroic history. But the horses smelled him coming. The air changed, the grass trembled, and they lifted their heads, nostrils flaring. Diomedes' guards were nearby, lounging in the half-ruined stable-yard, unaware they were about to experience a master class in demigod multitasking. Heracles ambushed them at dawn. There was shouting, chaos, the clang of bronze on bronze. When the dust settled, the guards were gone, and Heracles stood panting beside the tethered mares. He'd done the impossible, captured the beasts. Except, of course, that was the easy part. They screamed when he led them away, not whinnies, but something that sounded too human. The ground shivered with their fury. Diomedes himself came charging after, sword drawn, shouting curses that probably translated to, "Those are not covered under the warranty." The fight that followed was short, brutal, and left Heracles with a moral dilemma no hero handbook covers. Because here's the dark twist. In most versions, Heracles feeds Diomedes to his own horses. Whether out of revenge or strategy, they calm down afterward. The story doesn't say. The mares, sated, stand quietly while Heracles binds them for the journey back. The gods apparently appreciate efficiency. You stand by the riverbank and imagine it. The stillness afterward. The horses' heads bowed, breath misting in the morning air. There's something tragic about them now, no longer wild, just tired. You wonder whether they even wanted to be monsters, or if they were just born into a myth that never gave them a choice. Mainstream historians tend to see this labor as a metaphor for taming destructive passions, violence, hunger, greed. Horses were symbols of power and chaos in Greek thought. To control them was to control oneself. But a fringe theory you can't help but love says the story might preserve faint echoes of a real ritual. Ancient tribes in Thrace may have sacrificed horses to their war gods, feeding them flesh as part of a rite of renewal. Over time, the rumor twisted into legend, the legend into horror. You reach out in your imagination and touch one of the mare's necks. The heat beneath its skin is startling, as if a forge burns inside. It doesn't flinch, just exhales slowly, eyes half closed. There's something in that breath, a strange calm, maybe even gratitude. Heracles eventually led them back to Eurystheus, who, by now, had to be running out of jars to hide in. Predictably, the king panicked again. He ordered the horses released, not wanting them anywhere near civilization. They galloped off into the hills, disappearing into the wind, never to be seen again. Some say they wandered to Olympus, where they were adopted by Ares. Others whisper they became stars, their fiery manes the streaks we now call meteors. You stand in the settling dust, the silence stretching long. The air feels heavy with history, like every hoofbeat has pressed the same rhythm into the ground for centuries. You notice faint depressions in the dirt, round and smooth, leading away from the river. Maybe just erosion, or maybe something that once ran so fast the earth still remembers the pattern. Historians still argue whether the story of Diomedes' mares was meant to be a cautionary tale about cruelty or hubris. Either way, it's hard not to sympathize with the creatures themselves. They didn't ask to be turned into a metaphor, they just wanted to run. You look east toward the horizon that shimmers with morning heat. The scent of dust gives way to the faint tang of salt again. Another sea, another voyage. Somewhere beyond it, a new land waits. One of warrior women this time, fierce and sharp-eyed, living without kings or God's permission. The Amazons. But before you go, You glance back one last time at the fading trail of hoofprints. The breeze sweeps across the grass, erasing them one by one until the ground lies smooth again. No monsters, no proof, just a whisper of motion that hums like memory. You sigh. The rhythm of these labors is starting to feel hypnotic now. Chase, capture, release, repeat. You realize that every creature Heracles meets ends up teaching him something about power, about restraint, about the strange line between man and beast. The wind shifts. You hear distant drums, soft and syncopated, like heartbeats echoing across the plains. The Amazon campfires are burning somewhere ahead, their smoke curling into the evening sky. You adjust your pace, pull your cloak closer, and start walking toward the glow. Somewhere behind you, 4 unseen horses break into a gallop. Just wind this time, or maybe the ghosts of those fiery mares running forever, free at last. The plains stretch endlessly ahead, golden grass rippling under a low sun, the air carrying the faint scent of wood smoke and leather. You walk through the hush of twilight, following the rhythmic drumbeat that pulses across the horizon. It's not war you're hearing exactly, it's ritual, the measured cadence of riders keeping time with their hearts. The Amazons are near. Their camp appears like a mirage first, curved tents, banners fluttering with symbols of moon and bow, horses tethered in perfect formation, and in the center, a ring of warriors sparring in silence, their movements so fluid you almost forget the point is combat. These are the daughters of Ares, or so legend claims, women who bowed to no king, who built their own cities on the edge of the known world. Heracles' next labor brought him here, though not for conquest. He'd been ordered to retrieve the girdle of Hippolyta, the Amazon's queen, a task that sounds on paper suspiciously like petty theft. Historians still argue whether this was meant to symbolize male intrusion into female power, or if it was just a divine dare disguised as fashion theft. You step into the camp quietly, letting the scene wash over you. The Amazons move with purpose, braiding each other's hair, sharpening blades, laughing in the low, musical way of people who have never needed to whisper. Their horses, smaller and sleeker than the monstrous mares you left behind, stand calm, their coats shining with oil and sunlight. There's no fear here, no sense of waiting for men or monsters. The world hums at their pace. When Heracles arrived, it was with a small band of companions, weary and wary. Expecting hostility, they instead found hospitality. Hippolyta herself rode out to meet him, tall and poised, her armor a mosaic of gold and bronze. She listened to his story, the impossible labors, the demands of Eurystheus, and smiled faintly. Then, in a gesture that would shock any Greek audience, she offered him the girdle willingly. No blood, no battle, just respect between 2 warriors who understood duty. And for a moment, peace almost wins. But peace, in myth, rarely survives the supporting cast. Hera, ever the meddler, decided such civility was unacceptable. Disguised as an Amazon, she spread a rumor through the camp that Heracles had come to kidnap their queen. You can imagine the tension snapping, the sudden shout, the blur of motion, the clash of bronze on bronze, the air filled with the sound of arrows, hooves, and fury. The stories diverge after that. Some say Heracles fought his way out, killing Hippolyta in the confusion and taking the girdle as his grim prize. Others insist she lived, that she forgave him when the truth came clear, and that the battle ended not in death, but exhaustion. Historians still argue which ending the Greeks preferred, tragedy for its drama, or reconciliation for its morality. You watch from the edge of the camp as dusk deepens into violet. The firelight flickers across shields and faces, painting them in shifting gold. The Amazons sing now, their voices low and steady, a song with no words, just rhythm and breath. It's the sound of endurance, of lineage. You realize this story, whatever its details, isn't about a single queen or a stolen girdle. It's about existence without permission. Mainstream history has long tried to locate the Amazons on real maps. Some scholars point to the Scythians, nomadic tribes from the steppes who trained women to ride and fight alongside men. Ancient Greek merchants brought back stories of them, half admiration, half alarm, and Athens turned those tales into myth. A quirky tidbit? Archaeologists have actually found graves of Scythian women buried with weapons and horses, suggesting the Greeks were closer to the truth than they thought. The line between legend and anthropology blurs like heat over the plains. You wander between the tents, the scent of firewood and sweat heavy in the air. An Amazon passes by, her braid glinting like bronze wire, and nods politely. You nod back, acutely aware that you are the visitor here, the outsider in their calm. Somewhere nearby, a young warrior tells a child the old stories, the ones before Heracles came, before men claimed to define them. You catch phrases like, "We were lightning before the storm," and "The world forgot our names, but the sky remembers." It's strange how soothing this place feels. Maybe it's the balance, the quiet after so many monsters, the understanding that power doesn't always roar. You can almost feel the hum of the earth here, slow and confident, as if even the ground respects them. Heracles leaves this camp eventually, the girdle secured, but not triumphant. His journey through the Amazons feels different, less conquest, more reflection. You imagine him glancing back as he rides away, the firelight fading behind him, realizing perhaps that not every victory belongs to him. The night deepens, the last drumbeat fades, replaced by the sigh of wind through the grass. You can still smell the smoke, sweet and warm, curling into constellations overhead. For the first time in this long procession of labors, you feel the pulse of calm beneath the myth. No claws, no fangs, no blood, just the slow, steady rhythm of survival. But somewhere beyond this peace, another challenge stirs. Not divine this time, not even symbolic, just messy, human. The kind of trouble that begins with pride and ends with gossip. An adventure involving jealousy, misunderstanding, and one belt that launched 1,000 versions. You take a last look at the Amazons' camp. The fires burn low, the horses sleep standing, the warriors rest with their weapons across their knees. The world feels balanced for a heartbeat, strong, still, whole. Then you turn away, following the faint trail Heracles left behind. The next story waits just over the horizon, humming with scandal and irony. You can almost hear Hera chuckling somewhere in the clouds, already planning her next interruption. The grass sways around you, whispering farewells. You think you hear words in the wind, something like, "Run well, stranger," and then they're gone, leaving only the smell of embers and the faint gleam of moonlight on bronze. Morning slips in soft and rose-colored, the kind of dawn that feels like it should come with coffee and an apology. You follow the river east, its surface rippling with gold, and every now and then you glimpse a reflection of yourself that looks faintly like a Greek vase painting. Profile stoic, posture tragic. The air is warm now, scented with thyme and rumor. Somewhere ahead another story waits. A queen, a belt, and the kind of misunderstanding that would break a modern PR team. Heracles rides at your side again in imagination, looking considerably less heroic and more exasperated. He's just survived the Amazon interlude, and if this myth had office paperwork, his reasons for conflict box would definitely read divine interference. But the king still isn't done. Eurystheus, ever in the mood for high drama, orders him to fetch the girdle of Hippolyta. Only now, thanks to Hera's celestial meddling, that mission has turned into a scandal the size of a small war. You pass through lands thick with rumor. Every tavern retelling paints the event differently. In one, Heracles seduced the queen to win the belt. In another, he betrayed her trust. In yet another, she willingly handed it over, only for jealous gods to twist the narrative. Historians still argue whether the story's core was myth, misogyny, or a coded critique of diplomacy. All you know is that it feels strangely modern. Hero meets powerful woman, world can't handle it. When Heracles rode back toward Greece, the belt safely tied at his side, the air must have felt heavier. The gift had become guilt, and the gods were nowhere near done with their cosmic gossip column. Hera, delighted by the chaos, spread word that Heracles had attacked the Amazons. The rest of Greece nodded along, because why let facts ruin a perfectly dramatic tale? You pause by a grove of cypress trees where the wind moves like a whispering crowd. You can almost hear the echoes of the conversations that followed. Did you hear what he did? I thought they were friends. Well, my cousin swears she saw arrows. Even in antiquity, rumor moved faster than light. The girdle itself was said to shimmer, woven by Hephaestus from strands of gold, gifted to Hippolyta by Ares. It wasn't just jewelry, it was status, authority, divine certification of her queenship. To steal it, or even to borrow it, was a symbolic act of theft from womanhood itself. The poet softened this by saying Heracles didn't mean harm. Still, the damage was done. Mainstream historians see this as a parable about the collision between matriarchal and patriarchal societies. The Amazons represented a world outside Greek order, a world where women governed, fought, and chose their fates. Heracles, the emblem of male heroism, could only interact with that world through violence or conquest. But there's a quieter reading too. Maybe it's not about victory at all. Maybe it's about misunderstanding what strength looks like. A quirky tidbit surfaces in one obscure version. The girdle wasn't just ornamental, it sang. A low hum audible only at night, said to soothe warriors before battle. Some scholars believe this refers to an actual ancient artifact, a decorated belt used in rituals, strung with small bronze discs that chimed when moved. The melody might have been real once, lost to time like so many voices. You rest your hand against one of the cypress trunks. The bark feels cool, alive. For a second, you think you hear that faint metallic humming again, steady, rhythmic, almost like breath. Maybe it's just your pulse sinking to the story's pace, but you can't help imagining that somewhere the girdle still sings faintly in the dark, remembering every hand that touched it. When Heracles reached Eurystheus, the belt in hand, the king didn't celebrate. He never did. Each victory only reminded him how unstoppable his servant was, and that kind of competence terrifies bad managers everywhere. He inspected the girdle, nodded without gratitude, and added another impossible task to the list. Bureaucracy, eternal and undefeated. You walk on, the path winding between olive trees, heavy with fruit. The air hums with insects. The sun presses warm fingers against your shoulders, and you start to feel the lull of repetition. Each labor follows the same rhythm, command, chaos, lesson. Yet somehow, the music keeps changing. Different instruments, same refrain. Historians still argue whether these stories were ever meant to teach anything at all, or if they were just the Bronze Age equivalent of bedtime blockbusters. Maybe the moralizing came later, grafted on by philosophers who couldn't stand the thought of a good fight scene existing just for fun. But as you trace the patterns, the lion, the Hydra, the hind, the boar, the birds, the bull, the mares, the queen, you notice the shift. Less about power now, more about perspective. Each creature, each person, showing Heracles another version of strength. You stop by a stream where the water runs clear over smooth stones. The sound is almost like laughter, the gentle kind that comes from hindsight. You think about Hippolyta again, strong, regal, perhaps even kind. Heracles leaving her world behind, belt slung at his side, probably wondering whether he'd done the right thing. Maybe heroes don't get to know that part. Maybe that's why their stories echo forever. Unfinished questions pretending to be answers. The air changes again. You catch the smell of heat, dry, mineral, faintly metallic. Somewhere far south, under a brutal sun, another challenge waits. Herds lowing, dust rising, a three-bodied giant named Geryon guarding his scarlet cattle like living treasure. You can almost see it already, the horizon shimmering, the hero's silhouette small against the furnace of the west. Before you move on, you take one last look back at the grove. The wind rustles through the cypress leaves, soft and sighing, almost like applause. You wonder whether Hippolyta forgave him, or whether she never needed to. The myths don't say. They rarely let their women have the last word. But in the hush that follows, you imagine her voice, calm and sure. Take what you must, but remember who gave it. And then the sound fades, replaced by the distant bawling of cattle and the hiss of desert wind. You adjust your cloak, step back onto the path, and head toward the glare of the setting sun. The girdle glimmers faintly behind your eyelids, a loop of gold that hums with every step you take. The road west runs long and lonely, turning from green valleys into baked earth that gleams under the sun like hammered copper. The smell of time gives way to salt and dust. You walk with the slow confidence of someone who's learned that every horizon hides another ridiculous assignment. The next labor lies ahead, sprawling and sunburned, the cattle of Geryon. By now, Heracles' to-do list sounds like a series of bad travel blogs, 10 impossible things to fetch before lunch. But this one stands out. It's far away, almost at the world's edge, where the land melts into the Atlantic. The cattle aren't ordinary livestock. They belong to Geryon, a giant with 3 bodies joined at the waist and a sunburned disposition. Watching over him is Eurytion, a herdsman, and Orthrus, a 2-headed dog who presumably needs 2 chew toys just to stay civil. You crest a hill and feel the heat rise in shimmering waves. Somewhere down there lies the mythical island of Erythea, red-soiled and endless. The air hums faintly, like an oven whispering. You squint and almost see the shapes, the herd grazing by the shore, their hides tinted crimson from the sunset glare. The ancient poets claimed they were born that color, sacred to the sun god Helios, their blood a living flame. To reach them, Heracles had to cross the entire known world. Along the way, he built 2 great pillars, one on each side of the strait between Europe and Africa. Historians still argue whether these became the pillars of Hercules, the markers now known as Gibraltar and Mount Hacho, or whether the tale just explains how people imagined the edge of the world. Either way, the myth gave geography its drama. Every explorer sailing west afterward believed they were following in his footsteps. You imagine him there, the heat biting into his shoulders, the sea boiling with light. He prays to Helios for shade, and the sun, maybe amused, maybe annoyed, gives him a golden cup to sail across the ocean in. Yes, a cup, a literal, floating goblet. Fringe scholars have tried to explain this as a Bronze Age metaphor for solar travel, but you can't help picturing Heracles squatting in a cosmic teacup, paddling west with a spear. When he reaches Erythea, the air feels different, still, sharp, edged with danger. Orthrus bounds out first, both heads snarling in stereo. The ground trembles as Heracles meets it head-on. One swing of the club, and silence. Eurytion rushes forward next, loyal but doomed. Then, at last, Geryon himself appears, 3 torsos tall, armor gleaming like sunrise on bronze. You can almost hear his 3 hearts beating, out of sync, but powerful. The battle that follows is short and blinding. Arrows whistle, light fractures, dust turns to storm. When it ends, the air smells of iron and salt. Heracles stands alone again, heroic, victorious, deeply overworked. The cattle mill nervously around him, their eyes reflecting the dying sun. He gathers them, soothing them with rough murmurs, and begins the long trek home. Mainstream historians read this labor as an echo of ancient trade routes. Heracles, symbolizing the Mycenaean expansion westward, bringing back wealth and cattle from distant lands. Others suggest it's a mythic memory of the sun's daily journey across the sky, with Heracles as the solar hero guiding light back from the edge of night. And then there's the quirky tidbit. A few classical writers claim the red cattle of Geryon were so loud when lowing that they could be heard 100 miles away. Farmers, they said, knew to look up from their plows when the horizon moved. You stand in the shimmer of imagined heat, listening. The lowing drifts through the air, soft, rhythmic, almost hypnotic. It sounds less like an animal noise and more like breathing, like the world itself exhaling after holding tension too long. You realize how quiet the myths can become once the fighting ends. The journey back isn't simple, of course. Heracles has to drive the cattle across mountains and rivers, fend off bandits, appease angry gods. At one point, Hera sends a gadfly to scatter the herd, and he spends days rounding them up again, ancient foreshadowing for every modern project delay. You can almost picture him muttering, 12 labors, they said, character building, they said. He passes through Italy, where the locals watch this sunburnt stranger leading red cows across the fields and decide to start a new cult about it. Historians still argue whether this inspired early Roman myths, linking Hercules to their own founders. Wherever he went, his footprints turned into foundations. Eventually, the hero reaches Greece again, the cattle intact, the sun setting behind him in a blaze of orange. Eurystheus, predictably, panics at the sight of yet another divine animal delivery. He sacrifices some of the herd to Hera, perhaps to apologize for existing. The rest, legend says, wandered free until they became ordinary again, time washing the red from their hides like rain off old paint. You stand by the imagined shore of Erythea, where the sea still glows with that sunset hue. The air is heavy with warmth, and every sound feels muffled by distance. You think about how many creatures Heracles has faced now. Lion, serpent, deer, boar, birds, bull, mares, Amazons. And now this triple-bodied shepherd of the West. And somehow each story keeps circling back to the same truth. He's not fighting monsters anymore, he's negotiating with nature. Historians still argue whether that's why the later labors shift tone, less about victory, more about understanding limits. The ancient Greeks were learning, too, that conquering the world meant first surviving it. You watch the horizon fade to gold. The cattle have become silhouettes moving across the dunes, each one trailing a shadow as long as myth itself. You can almost see Heracles leading them home, his figure small against the vastness, his step steady, his sighs deep. A faint wind rises, carrying the smell of olives and faraway rain. Somewhere ahead waits a garden heavy with golden fruit, apples no one should eat, guarded by a serpent that never sleeps. You can already sense its glow bleeding into the sky, a promise and a warning all at once. You turn away from the red horizon. The ground underfoot feels warmer now, softer. The myth continues to unspool in its patient rhythm, challenge, lesson, release. Each step hums with that quiet inevitability. And far off in the distance between heat and twilight, you think you hear faint laughter, the gods perhaps, or the world itself amused that even heroes have deadlines. The light changes as you walk. The bronze heat of the cattle's homeland cools into a soft, honeyed glow, and the air begins to shimmer, not with heat this time, but with something subtler, magic. You smell blossoms before you see them, sweet, metallic, faintly citrus. A breeze brushes your cheek, and it feels like touching sunlight. You've reached the garden of the Hesperides, the orchard at the edge of the world, where golden apples grow that no one should eat and no one should take. It feels quiet here, sacred even by mythic standards. The trees hum faintly as though singing to themselves, their leaves whispering in a language older than God's. The apples glint softly, not harsh or gaudy, just warm, steady light, like the glow from behind closed eyelids. You stand at the threshold, listening. Somewhere deep among the trees coils a sound that isn't wind, a low, slow exhale, the sound of scales against bark. The dragon Ladon is awake. You've met enough monsters by now to know the rhythm of this kind of encounter. Beauty guarding danger, serenity holding its breath. Heracles knew it too. This was his 11th labor, to fetch the apples of the Hesperides, the daughters of the evening star. The problem was that no one could say for sure where the garden actually was. Historians still argue whether the Greeks meant Spain, North Africa, or a metaphorical place past reason. Whatever the truth, it sat on the edge of map and imagination, the border between divine and mortal. Heracles wandered for days, or maybe years, depending on which poet you ask, asking anyone and anything for directions. He even found Prometheus chained to his rock, liver regenerating in real time. In one of myth's rare acts of compassion, Heracles freed him, breaking Zeus's punishment for a moment of mercy. In return, Prometheus told him where to find the garden and how to survive it. You can almost picture the conversation, one immortal, jaded and half-starved, looking up at a sweaty demigod and saying, "Turn left at the edge of eternity, then ask the dragon nicely." When Heracles finally reached the orchard, the Hesperides themselves greeted him, not with fear, but with that strange, distant curiosity, divine beings reserved for mortals who refuse to quit. They were radiant, each glowing faintly with twilight colors, gold, rose, deep blue. They sang, though whether it was a welcome or a warning depends on which version you believe. And there, coiled around the tree's trunk, was Ladon, the dragon guardian. not monstrous in the usual way, but eternal, beautiful, scales shining like overlapping mirrors. He never slept, they said, not even when the stars blinked out. His breath tasted of sap and starlight. Heracles had two options: take the apples by force or find another way. He chose the latter, or at least one of the smarter poets says he did. He went to Atlas, the Titan, who held up the sky, and offered a deal. I'll carry your burden if you'll fetch me the fruit. For once, the strength that defined him turned into patience. Atlas, aching from eons of weight, agreed. He set the heavens into Heracles' hands, impossibly heavy, infinitely vast, and went to pluck the golden apples. You can imagine the silence of that moment. Heracles bent under the cosmos, every constellation pressing into his shoulders, his knees trembling, the stars themselves whispering against his skin. Time must have slowed to syrup. When Atlas returned with the apples, he had second thoughts. You know, he said, I could take these to Eurystheus for you. You just stay here with the sky. It's the oldest workplace scam in existence. Heracles smiled, nodded, and said, Sure thing, but could you hold it just for a moment while I adjust my cloak? Atlas sighed, took back the heavens, and Heracles, with a grin as old as mischief, walked away with the apples. Historians still argue whether this story was about wit triumphing over brute strength, or whether it symbolized humanity momentarily holding the weight of the divine. Some even suggest the Garden of the Hesperides represented the Milky Way itself, a celestial orchard where stars were the apples. The ancient mind was never far from metaphor. Every fruit was a universe waiting to be picked. And then there's the quirky tidbit. Fragments of old Greek calendars show that the myth might have been tied to the harvest season. The golden apples could have been oranges, the first imported from the east, and the dragon Ladon, an allegory for the desert heat guarding ripened fruit, which makes the myth less about stealing magic and more about surviving August. You walk between the trees now, careful not to touch anything. The apples glow faintly, each one humming with low, steady energy. You can almost taste the light on the air, sweet, heavy, the flavor of every temptation in the world. Somewhere, Ladon shifts, tail dragging through the grass. He doesn't strike. He just watches, eyes like twin suns, ancient and patient. You realize he's not guarding the apples from you. He's guarding them for you. For all mortals, really. Because once someone eats what gods eat, the stories stop. The breeze turns soft and warm. The air fills with drifting petals that sparkle faintly before dissolving. You catch one and feel it melt against your palm, leaving only warmth behind. Maybe that's all the myth ever meant, that the divine isn't something to own, only to witness. Heracles returns from this place quieter than before. The apples glimmer in his satchel, but he looks less like a conqueror and more like someone who's glimpsed too much light. When he hands them over, Athena herself intervenes, returning the fruit to the Hesperides, because mortals, even half-divine ones, don't get to keep eternity. You take a slow breath. The air here seems to hum in your lungs, steady and slow. Historians still argue whether the labors were punishment, purification, or simply a very long cosmic internship. But by this point, it's clear they're changing him, and you, by extension. The monsters have softened into mirrors. You turn to leave the garden, feeling the warmth fade behind you. The apples sway gently in the breeze, their light dimming as you go. Somewhere deep in the branches, Ladon's coils gleam like rivers of gold. He exhales once, long, low, almost a sigh, and the sound rolls through the leaves like distant thunder. You keep walking, and the world darkens around you, the scent of fruit replaced by cold stone and sulfur. The next gate is the last one, where daylight ends and a three-headed dog waits to see if you have enough courage left to pass. You step down from the light of the orchard into a world that smells of ash and cold stone. The color drains slowly from the air, replaced by a faint violet hue, like twilight filtered through smoke. This is the path to Hades, the underworld, the quiet heartbeat beneath everything. Somewhere in that dimness, a low growl rolls across the silence, steady and rhythmic, like the tide but deeper. You've reached the door to death. Cerberus waits there, the three-headed dog of the underworld, guardian and greeter, jailer and judge. His fur bristles like shadow spun into muscle. His eyes burn faintly red, though not cruelly. He's not evil. He's just the bouncer of eternity. You get the sense he's been sitting here for eons, bored out of all proportion, occasionally chasing ghostly sticks just to pass the time. Heracles' final labor, the 12th, was to bring Cerberus to the surface, alive. No weapons, no tricks, just persuasion, or at least polite wrestling. By now, Heracles had fought beasts, crossed oceans, and outwitted titans. But this one wasn't about muscle. This one was about nerve. The path downward winds past cold caverns, slick with mist. You can almost hear the whisper of souls, some murmuring their stories, others humming softly to themselves. There's no fire here, no screaming, no cartoonish torment, just an immense, echoing stillness. Historians still argue whether the Greeks truly believed in this place as literal or symbolic, a vast metaphor for memory, not punishment. Maybe it's both. Heracles enters with the help of Hermes and Athena. Divine permission slips in hand. The ferryman Charon rows them across the Styx in his creaking boat, side-eyeing Heracles' lion-skin cloak, but not asking questions. On the far shore, ghosts part around him like ripples around a stone. They recognize something familiar in him, a mortal who's already been through enough to belong. Then the ground trembles. Cerberus emerges. 3 heads, 3 different expressions, one wary, one snarling, one oddly amused. His tail lashes once, scattering sparks across the stone. When he speaks, or whatever the equivalent of 3 synchronized growls would be, it vibrates in your chest. Heracles doesn't draw a weapon. He kneels slowly, the lion's mane falling forward like a curtain. For a moment, the two just look at each other, man and guardian, neither blinking. Then, with a deep breath, Heracles lunges. The struggle shakes the caverns. You can almost feel the pulse of it through your feet, the heavy thud of paws, the grind of rock, the echo of exertion. It's not violent exactly. It's like a test of mutual will. Eventually, Heracles wraps his arms around the creature's middle and holds on, every muscle trembling. Cerberus snarls once, twice, then stills. The silence afterward feels sacred. Heracles whispers something, maybe a promise, maybe an apology. When he stands, the dog follows, obedient but proud. You imagine the underworld holding its breath as the gates swing open and the two ascend toward daylight. Mainstream historians have long seen this story as a symbolic descent into the unconscious, a hero facing death itself and returning changed. It's the origin of every underworld journey that would come after, from Orpheus to Dante, to every dreamer who ever faced their own dark. The labor isn't about conquest, it's about confrontation, the acceptance that even heroes end. A quirky tidbit, early vase paintings sometimes show Cerberus not as a monstrous creature, but as an oversized puppy with 3 smiling heads and a snake for a tail. Some scholars think the Greeks had a dark sense of humor about mortality. Others think they just liked the aesthetic. Either way, you can't help but grin a little at the image. A triple-headed dog wagging politely while guarding the gates of forever. You stand beside the imagined riverbank, watching Heracles climb the long tunnel back toward light, Cerberus padding quietly beside him. When they reached the surface, the world must have looked impossibly bright. Eurystheus, predictably, nearly faints at the sight of them. Heracles, tired but unbroken, probably just shrugs and says, "Don't worry, he's house-trained." The myth says he returned the dog unharmed, leading it gently back down to its post. You can picture Cerberus curling up at the threshold again, 3 heads sighing in unison, dreaming of endless fields where even guardians get to rest. Historians still argue whether this was truly his last labor or whether others came after, smaller, quieter tasks lost to time. But for storytelling's sake, this one feels like the closing of a circle. The hero has faced the world above and below, tamed beasts, outwitted gods, and carried the weight of heaven itself. Now he walks free, his name echoing through every mountain and meadow of Greece. You linger there a moment longer. The air from the underworld seeps cool and damp through the stones, tinged with something metallic, almost comforting. You realize the myths were never about escape. They were about returning. Every descent needs an ascent. Every night needs its dawn. As you step back into the open air of memory, the light feels softer now, washed with gray and gold. The monsters are gone, the labor's done, but the echoes remain, the growl, the hiss, the bellow, the flutter of bronze wings. You can almost hear them aligning behind you, forming an invisible procession, proof that every terror once faced becomes part of your story. And just ahead, past the quiet hills, the horizon ripples again. You sense it, the turn toward reflection, the moment when all the creatures you've met will step out of their roles and speak in their true voices, asking gently what they were really trying to show you. You walk toward that gathering calm, toward the place where even myths stop roaring and start whispering. You emerge from the twilight of the underworld into a gentler dusk, the kind that holds its breath between sunset and memory. The path behind you glows faintly, each labor flickering like a lantern along a long road. For the first time, the world feels quiet. The air smells of rain that hasn't fallen yet. You can almost hear the ghosts of every monster turning their heads, listening as if wondering what you've learned. You walk slowly. Your steps sink into the soft earth, and the stories begin to reorder themselves behind your eyes. The lion's roar becomes the Hydra's hiss, becomes the beat of wings, becomes the soft stamp of hooves. They blend together until you realize they're all singing the same song, not of defeat, but of endurance. Somewhere between one heartbeat and the next, you begin to see them again, each creature, softer now, stepping out of the shadows not to fight, but to be remembered. The Nemean Lion pads forward first, no longer roaring. Its golden mane flickers in the dim light, calm and regal. It nods at you, slow and proud, as if to say, "Strength isn't the point. Survival is." Behind it, the Hydra's many heads rise like reeds swaying in a breeze, their eyes luminous and tired. They don't hiss this time. They whisper, "Cut us, and we return." It's what problems do. You must learn to burn the roots, not the tips. The Ceryneian Hind drifts out next, silent as dawn. Its golden antlers brush your shoulder, scattering dust that glimmers briefly before fading. Its voice, if it has one, is laughter without sound. You can chase what you love forever. Sometimes the running is the lesson. From the snow line comes the Erymanthian Boar, tusks dulled now, breath steaming in rhythm. It lowers its head, not in defeat, but in something like a bow. Patience is power too, it seems to murmur. Rage spends itself faster than winter. And then a flurry of motion. The Stymphalian Birds, metallic feathers catching the light like wind chimes. They circle once above your head, scattering echoes. Their message is quieter than the clamor that once defined them. Noise fades. The silence after matters more. You smile faintly, realizing that all of these monsters, the ones who screamed and struck and fled, have become teachers. Even the bull of Crete appears, walking slow and dignified, the surf hissing softly around its hooves. Its hide gleams silver under the fading sun. You cannot control the sacred. It tells you without words. You can only carry it until it calms. The mares of Diomedes thunder past next, manes streaming like banners, no longer wild, but free. Their hooves leave no prints, only a rush of air. They remind you that hunger, literal or otherwise, can consume you unless you learn to guide it. The Amazons ride behind them, silent and unflinching, their armor gleaming like dawn on river water. Hippolyta meets your eyes, her expression unreadable but kind. Respect is not surrender, her gaze says, and forgiveness isn't weakness. You take another step, and the landscape shifts again. The cattle of Geryon graze peacefully nearby, their hides no longer red but sunset-colored. Geryon himself lingers in the distance, 3 faces softened into one. Even monsters just want their home back, he says quietly, and you can almost believe it. The dragon Ladon coils through the clouds above the horizon, golden and slow, his eyes twin moons. Guard what matters, his sigh rumbles, not from others, but from forgetting. And somewhere at your heel, Cerberus trots gently, all 3 heads panting softly, content. The underworld's most feared creature has become, impossibly, a good boy. Historians still argue whether the Greek heroes ever learned from the monsters they fought, or if that idea is a modern wish, the desire to believe violence can lead to wisdom. Maybe the ancient poets meant nothing so sentimental. Maybe they just liked symmetry. 12 tasks, 12 victories, a moral ledger neatly balanced. But when you stand here, feeling all these creatures watching you, it's hard not to sense a deeper pattern. Each one was an aspect of chaos, nature, death, desire, greed. But together, they outlined something more human. The lion was pride, the Hydra, persistence, the deer, restraint, the boar, rage, the birds, fear, the bull, defiance, the mares, appetite, the Amazons, balance, the cattle, endurance, the apples, temptation, the dog, mortality. A curriculum of the soul disguised as an action movie. You glance upward. The stars have begun to appear, faint at first, then sharp and bright. They arrange themselves into shapes you almost recognize, constellations that mirror the beasts you've met. The ancients did this too, pinning their fears to the sky so they could watch them from a safe distance. A clever trick, really. When you name the monster, it becomes story. When you tell the story, it loses its teeth. A quirky tidbit floats up from the back of your mind. In some old fragments, Heracles himself becomes a constellation after death, his labors drawn across the heavens like a celestial resume. Maybe that's why the Greeks imagined the gods looking down, amused. They'd learned to turn struggle into decoration. You wonder if that's what myth really is, a museum for pain that time has made beautiful. You take a deep breath, letting the cool air fill your lungs. The ground hums faintly beneath your feet, like the world itself, remembering the rhythm of all those ancient heartbeats. For a moment, you think you hear the lion purr, the Hydra's scales rustle, the bird feathers clink, the dog's tails thump softly. Not frightening anymore, just sound, life, looping back into itself. Historians still argue whether Heracles was hero or cautionary tale, whether his labors purified him or just punished him for existing. But standing here, with the monsters calm around you, it seems like both could be true. Punishment and progress are cousins, after all. Every scar carries a story. Every myth ends up being autobiography written in metaphor. The air thickens with twilight. The monsters begin to fade, one by one, their shapes dissolving into the dusk like smoke into ink. You want to call after them, to ask if they're at peace, but you already know the answer. They don't need peace. They are peace now, absorbed into the balance of the world. All that remains is you, and the faint sound of water somewhere ahead. A river, maybe, or just the edge of the dream pulling you forward. You follow it quietly as the last of the golden light fades from the hills. Behind you, the myth exhales. Ahead, only silence waits, the kind that means something's ending, but gently. The river gleams ahead, silver, quiet, endless. The air has softened to that bluish shade that lives between dusk and full dark, when even sound seems to move slower. You walk beside the current, listening to it murmur in the low, even tone of someone who's been telling the same story forever and never grows tired of it. The monsters are gone now, their echoes folded back into the land, and all that's left is the hush after thunder, the long exhale that says, "It's over now." You don't hurry. The myths have slowed your pace, and your mind feels heavy in a comfortable way, like a stone that's finally found where it belongs. You trace the path backward in your memory, the lion's glare, the Hydra's hiss, the golden hind's blur, the boar's charge, the metallic storm of wings, the bull's defiance, the mare's hunger, the Amazon's calm, the red cattle, the glowing apples, the triple-headed dog, and then the quiet reckoning with what it all meant. Each labor, each creature, was a line in a lullaby you didn't know you were learning. Together, they form a pattern that feels less like conquest and more like completion. It dawns on you that the monsters were never really beaten. They were understood, then remembered. That's all myths ever wanted. You reach a flat stone by the water's edge and sit. The ground feels warm, even in the cooling night. Overhead, the stars begin their patient shimmer, arranging themselves into constellations that look almost familiar. The ancients would have called them heroes and beasts. You see something softer, a pattern that says, this was effort, this was change, this was necessary. For a while, you just listen. The wind moves through the reeds with a sound like pages turning. Every few breaths, the water laps against the stone in steady rhythm, like the slow pulse of time itself. Somewhere nearby, a frog croaks, and for a split second, you imagine it's the Hydra's faint chuckle, still amused at how everything grows back eventually. You smile. Even the myths get to have inside jokes. You wonder what Heracles did when it was all done, after the labors, After the applause, after the weight of story settled around him like a cloak, did he sleep better? Did he miss the monsters? Historians still argue whether he found peace or only exhaustion. But maybe peace is just exhaustion that you've decided to keep. You lie back on the stone and look up. The stars reflect faintly in the water, turning the river into a mirror that holds both sky and self. You can almost see the lion crouch there in Leo, the serpent coiling as Hydra, the archer's bow aimed toward forever. The world is stitched together with memory. Bright points connected by invisible lines, just like you've done tonight, weaving each monster into something that makes sense. A breeze drifts across your face, carrying the scent of olive and salt and dust. It smells like grease, or maybe like time itself. You let your eyes half close. The narration of your own thoughts slows until it's barely there. The monster's voices fade completely now, replaced by the deeper hum beneath everything. The same sound that might have filled those old amphorae when they were new. That old bronze note of a world endlessly retelling itself. Somewhere far away, you hear faint laughter, maybe the gods, or maybe just the night settling comfortably into its role. The arguments of historians fade too, and you're left only with the certainty that the stories were never about gods punishing a man or monsters losing their battles. They were lullabies for civilizations learning to name their fears. Every head cut from the Hydra, every roar stilled, every labyrinth escaped. It was humanity saying, "We see you now. You can rest." You turn onto your side, and the stone beneath you feels like a mattress warmed by sunlight. The water's rhythm syncs with your breathing. Inhale, exhale, flow, return. The stars blur slightly, as if leaning closer to listen. You think you might be dreaming already. The myths are quiet now. The lion curls into a golden hillside somewhere. The Hydra hums under its pond. The deer flickers through fog. The boar sighs into snow. The birds rustle like wind in trees. The bull lowers its head to the tide. The mares run endlessly through night fields. The Amazons laugh softly around their fire. The cattle graze in red dusk. The apples glow faintly beyond reach. Cerberus yawns at his gate, content. The echoes of all of them fill the spaces between your heartbeats. The world feels older, gentler. The noise of heroes has faded, replaced by the steady hum of what remains after story. Rest, rhythm, return. You exhale once, long and deep, and the air seems to move through the entire myth before coming back warm. Now, in this hush, the narrator's voice softens. Every sound lengthens, vowels stretching like waves. The words blur at their edges until they feel like touch, not speech. The lion sleeps, the Hydra sleeps, you sleep. Everything that had to be fought has been met. Everything that had to roar has quieted. The myths drift backward into the sea of time, becoming ripples, then stillness, then nothing at all. Only breath remains, steady, slow, safe. And somewhere in that stillness, just before you slip under, a whisper, half air, half thought, murmurs the last truth the monsters ever told. Even nightmares grow tired. Let them rest with you. The water sighs once more, the stars blink lazily overhead, and the night folds itself around you like a story finally closing its book. The air cools to velvet. The night exhales, and even the stars seem to stretch before settling. You feel weightless now, drifting not forward, not back, just gently downward into quiet. The world slows its pulse for you. The myths that once thrashed and shouted are only ripples beneath your drifting thoughts. Each breath grows longer, smoother. The wind hums low across invisible fields, the same rhythm that carried the heroes home. You can almost see their campfires, tiny sparks fading against the horizon, smoke rising in slow spirals that unwind into clouds. Somewhere out there, the sea laps against a shore that's older than time, rocking every story back to sleep. The monsters have all gone still. Their shapes dissolve into the texture of the land, the lion into hills, the hydra into streams, the bull into the curve of waves. Even Cerberus curls up at the threshold of dreams, his three heads sinking one by one into slumber. The air around you thickens, softens, holds you like water. You let go of the need to follow, to chase, to remember who won. The stories hum on without you. They've been telling themselves long before your breath, and they'll keep going long after, woven into the whisper of leaves and the hush of distant tides. The last sound you notice is your own breathing, slow and sure. The last thought that flickers is simple. Everything you've imagined tonight is safe now, folded into the dark. So you let the silence have you, the way the sea takes back its waves, gently, rhythmically, forever.